Hi folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Our lesson today is on ncclient, which is a library for communicating with devices that support NETCONF. So let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about ncclient. As you can see here from the documentation page, ncclient is a Python library for NetConf clients. Now, just to clear this up, in NetConf terminology, the thing that is running on your server, in other words, your laptop or your desktop system that's communicating with the device, is called the client, and the thing running on the device itself is called the server. So this is designed, ncclient is designed for running on your server that's accessing your devices out in the network. And as it says, it offers an intuitive API that sensibly maps XML encoded nature of NetConf, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it's for communicating using NetConf and returning you XML type data that is relatively easy to handle. I just want to point out something when we talked about, for example, Napalm. Napalm will do NetConf underneath, in addition PyEZ, and there's some other tools that are available out there for Cisco devices and elsewhere that will do NetConf underneath. They provide a level of abstraction. ncclient doesn't really provide you the level of abstraction other than managing the NetConf protocol and allowing you to get your XML data to and from the device. So how does ncclient work? Well, the first thing that we have to do is connect to devices. And so you can see I've defined 3 devices here. If you were to look at the long form version of this course in 52 weeks of Python, then you would see me communicating with this CSR sandbox device. As it turns out, that device no longer exists in the Cisco sandbox, or at least I cannot find it. So I've replaced it with an iOS XR device, which I have found and that we will be communicating with. There's also a Nexus device that exists out there as well. And so in the code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through. Here you can see that I'm creating my own list on the fly for using the Nexus device and the iOS XR device. So I'll go through them one at a time. And I'm going to do different things depending on which device I'm going to. What I'm going to do in common is connect with the device. So with ncclient, I need to pass in a number of parameters, including the host. And so you can see I've cleverly defined my device here in the for loop, and it will either be the Nexus device or the iOS XR device. And I'll be referencing the host value, the host item. And so this is the host item for the iOS XR device. This is the host item for the Nexus device. And this is the port, the username, password. Device params is important. The other things were kind of common across all of our communication methods that we've used. All these different communication methods that we've used. But this device params is something that NetConf needs, and it has certain particular ones that are defined, including CSR, iOS XR, and Nexus, so you have to use the correct one. Now let's move on and look at how we actually access data on the device. So what I've done in this course is I'm going to demonstrate 2 different methods of getting information from the device. One of them is using a get method in order to get a specific subtree. Another is get config, which gets you the whole configuration, and you can request a specific type of configuration. In this case, I'm getting the running config, as you can see. And for the Nexus device, I happen to know the XML definition for the thing that I want. So you need to have knowledge, specific knowledge of the XML definition of what it is that you want to get. So I'm specifying I want to get the system. I'm specifying the namespace here. And the actual item that I want to get is going to be the serial number. And so it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about to go through XML. This is a week-long class to understand all of the details of this, but this is if I want to get one specific item. And in this situation, I'm getting the subtree, which is going to be this serial number for XML and XOS, which I then proceed to print out. I have to extract it from the data there. Now the second way that I can get data is a little bit simpler, but it gets me the whole configuration blob. So everything associated with this configuration I am going to get. I then print it out, which you can see you do have to jump through a number of hoops to deal with the XML data that comes back from these requests. So this is the pattern that I've seen used most often. We refer to the data mail element within the configuration that we get back, and we need to do a decode of that. And yeah, there's some etree parsing that happens when it takes it from the data element into a string format. But this is just kind of cookie cutter and what we tend to do. Now the next thing you'll see is a whole bunch of commented out code. This is code that I use to access specific pieces of data within the CSR device that I was dealing with. In fact, if you look here, you can see that I used to be dealing with the CSR device. But if you are interested in this code right here, I'm not going to spend time going through it because it's not working. We don't have the CSR device anymore. But you can look at the long form version of this, and I do explain it. What I am going to do is I'm going to take that configuration data that we just dealt with and that we received and printed, and I'm going to use this function right here. Now, when we went through an earlier lesson in M02 files, you recall we talked about doing XML. And in this XML, I used a package that I had found called XML to dict. And I found that it's way easier to deal with Python data, because I understand Python data, than it is to deal with XML data. And so if I can get the XML data into a nice, handy Python format, then I can deal with it easier. If not, then I'm going to need to do a lot of this stuff that we've commented out, which is going to require me to have a much deeper knowledge of XML. But all I do instead is I just take the config data, and I'm going to do this conversion using XML to dict parse. That's going to parse the XML, and then I'm going to pretty print that thing out. So now let's run this thing and look at the output. This is where I cross my fingers and hope that the devices are still up. You can see here, whoops, that went pretty fast. So you can see that's actually pretty nice that it went so fast. Here's the first thing. I connected to my Nexus device right here successfully, so that's good. The next thing that I did is this thing right here, where I got the serial number for the device. So I did the serial number subtree. Remember, I passed in that information that said I'm only interested in this particular item, and it got me the serial number. Here you can see this is the serial number of the device. Now it's still in XML format. I would probably want to convert that into Python using XML to dict, and then I would be able to easily access it in Python. Now the next thing that we did was we connected to our iOS XR device, and I successfully connected to it. And the next thing that I did is I printed out the XML. If you recall, one of the first things I did after I got the data and I did that etree decode, etc., this is all of the XML data that is in that configuration on that device. And it is very large, so I'm going to attempt to scroll faster through here. Okay, so here's the end of the XML data. Then I called XML to dict, and if you're like me and you enjoy data formats that you're more familiar with, of course you and I can read this, but parsing it becomes a little bit difficult. However, I can easily understand and parse this Python data. So this is my pretty print of the Python data, and here it is. Here's the SNMP community MIB. You can see SNMP notification MIB, SNMP target MIB. As I go through here, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff. This is all SNMP stuff. Let's see if there's something else. Here's some AAA information, usernames that are configured on the device that I can see, authentication, authorization. As we go through here, here's my address pool service. Here's BGP information. So you can see I've made this window really wide so you can see as much of this as possible. I probably should tell it, I don't know if I could tell it to indent it less. I'm not sure how much difference that would make, but you can see here's all of my BGP information. And here's CDP, control plane, gRPC, etc., and the interfaces. So you get the idea. This is how we use ncclient and how to convert that data that we get back in NETCONF/XML format into Python where we can deal with it. Okay, let's review what we talked about in terms of communicating with devices using NetConf. We're using ncclient. ncclient allows us to define our devices and then to connect to them. Once we've connected, we can get at data that is in a specific subtree, or we can get the entire configuration. And lastly, we used XML to dict in order to parse the entire thing and get it into a friendly Python format. That's it. Hopefully that gives you a taste of doing NetConf stuff using ncclient. I hope that makes sense. And if not, let me know. And as always, thanks for listening.